Former President Donald Trump leads the polls in New Hampshire by a hefty margin. The newest numbers from RealClearPolitics showing Mr. Trump with 45% of the vote. That's more than triple that of his next closest competitor, Nikki Haley. Florida Governor Ron DeSantis is in third place. The date of the New Hampshire primary has not officially been confirmed, but the state has held the first presidential primary in the nation every election season since 1920. We do want to bring in Niall Stanage now, White House columnist at The Hill. Niall, thanks for staying with us.
Good to be with you.
So Donald Trump leading by that enormous margin we just saw in New Hampshire. But tell me about Nikki Haley trending upwards in the polls there. She is in second place in that state now. What can she attribute that to?
I think several things. Firstly, Nikki Haley has impressed people in the couple of debates so far. Secondly, part of the issue is Ron DeSantis's continued decline in the polls. That provided an opening for someone, and the someone looks like it's Nikki Haley. The one other point that I would make about New Hampshire, Natasha, and it is really important, even though it can sound a little bit like inside baseball, a lot of primaries are so-called closed primaries, where only people who are long-time registered as Republicans or Democrats can vote. In New Hampshire, that isn't the case. You can request a ballot on the day if you're an unaligned voter, and about 42% of all voters in New Hampshire have that status. That creates a lot of uncertainty for a start. It also creates an opening for a more moderate candidate like Nikki Haley.
Interesting. I appreciate that. But is it realistic that she could catch Trump in New Hampshire?
Probably not. No, I mean, look, the former president is way, way ahead in the polls, not just in New Hampshire, but nationally. And nobody has really been a danger to him yet. New Hampshire does have a record or a history of providing surprises in primary elections in both parties. I think the danger, though, is because it is such an atypical state. Let's say Nikki Haley did spring a big surprise there. Would she be a political one-hit wonder? In other words, once the primaries shift to places like South Carolina, would she fall away? Would Trump regain dominance? I think that's the problem when it comes to New Hampshire.
Yeah, and New Hampshire's primary, typically the first in the nation. Does that give it an outsized level of importance? And following that, does this primary make or break a presidential candidate?
It does give the New Hampshire primary a lot of importance, for sure. Typically, what we've seen in the couple of first contests, the Iowa caucuses, then the New Hampshire primary, is those contests knock a certain number of candidates out. They winnow the field. So we have this large field at the moment. That isn't going to be the case by the time of the night of the New Hampshire primary, probably, because several candidates will just be obviously non-viable. So a lot of the time, these two first contests, the Iowa caucuses followed by the New Hampshire primary, are about proving that you are going to go the distance, that you're one of the top 2 or 3 candidates who remain salient after that point.
I do want to ask you, one of the things we're hearing this weekend, GOP candidates taking aim at former President Trump over his comments about Israel. He said that Prime Minister Netanyahu was not prepared and let us down. Let's listen to some of the reaction from other candidates today.
I found the former president's comments to be reckless and irresponsible. Leaders in this country should be sending no message other than America stands with Israel.
Yeah, and that was just former VP Mike Pence, but he was not alone there. Niall, what do you make of all of them making note of Trump's comment here?
I do think that they think Trump made a mistake by making that sort of remark in the middle of such a horrific situation that we're witnessing unfold day after day in Israel and in Gaza. So look, they see that, or they believe that he made a mistake and that gives them an opportunity. The one thing I would say, Natasha, is we could talk and list Donald Trump controversies. We'd be here to the end of the show at least, and none of them has damaged him that much. He still remains the overwhelming favourite for the GOP.
Controversy after controversy, nickname after nickname, indictment after indictment, and we're still staring down 45% in New Hampshire. I think you're right, Niall. Niall Stanage, appreciate your time. Have a great evening. Thank you. Thank you for watching. Go to newsnationnow.com to find News Nation on your television provider. And don't forget to click the red subscribe button below to get more of News Nation's fact-driven, unbiased coverage.